The storm was violent that October night, and Karen should have left her clinic an hour ago. Rain hammered against the windows like desperate fists, and thunder rolled through the empty hallways. She was alone, or so she thought, until she heard it. A small voice, barely a whisper, cutting through the storm. "I'm alone." Karen froze. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the darkened waiting room, and there he was, a boy no older than 8, soaking wet and trembling. His clothes clung to his small frame, and his eyes held something that made her blood run cold. But it wasn't fear in those eyes, it was determination, and in his tightly closed fist, he clutched something he refused to let go. If you believe in the power of real-life stories where courage comes from the smallest hearts, hit that subscribe button, because what Karen discovered in that boy's hand would change everything. Karen knelt down slowly, making herself smaller, less threatening. She'd spent 15 years as a child psychologist, and she knew better than to rush a traumatized child. "Hi there," she said softly. "My name's Karen. What's yours?" The boy's lips moved, but the words came out barely audible. "I'm alone." He said it again, like a mantra, like the only truth he knew. Karen noticed his knuckles, bruised and scraped. Dirt caked under his fingernails. His bare feet were bleeding. This wasn't a child who'd simply wandered away from home. This was a child who'd fought his way to freedom. She grabbed a blanket from the supply closet and wrapped it around his shaking shoulders. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're not alone anymore." But the boy didn't seem to hear her. His eyes remained fixed on the floor, and that fist, that small, determined fist, stayed clenched tight. Karen's training told her to call the authorities immediately, but something in her gut screamed that she needed to understand what he was holding first. Whatever it was more important to him than warmth, than safety, than anything else in the world. Minutes stretched into an hour. Karen tried everything: warm tea, gentle questions, even comfortable silence. The boy, who she'd learned was named Levi, remained locked in his own world. He flinched violently at every crack of thunder, and Karen noticed how his eyes constantly darted to the doors, as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. She'd seen trauma before, but this was different. This child wasn't running from something. He was running toward something, toward hope, toward help. And whatever he held in his hand was the key to everything. Karen changed her approach. She sat down beside him and began talking, not to him, but into the quiet space between them. She told him about when she was 7 years old, how she'd gotten separated from her mother in a shopping mall, how the fear had wrapped around her chest like iron bands, how a kind stranger had helped her, had believed her when she was scared and small. "I understand being alone," she said softly. "I understand being afraid. But I also understand being brave enough to ask for help." And then slowly, so slowly Karen almost didn't notice, Levi's fingers began to uncurl. The movement was deliberate, painful, as if releasing this object meant releasing a part of himself. Karen held her breath as his palm opened fully, revealing a crumpled, water-stained piece of paper. Her hands trembled as she carefully took it from him, smoothing it out under the lamplight. The handwriting was childish, shaky, but unmistakable, and as Karen read the words, the entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. "If you're reading this, I made it out. Find my sister Emma. She's still in the basement. 412 Maple Street, please hurry. Levi." The paper nearly slipped from Karen's fingers. Her eyes shot to Levi, whose face had crumpled, tears finally breaking through. "I had to leave her," he choked out. "I had to. She was too small to climb out the window. I promised I'd come back. I promised." His words tumbled out in a desperate rush, each one more heartbreaking than the last. He'd been locked in a basement with his 5-year-old sister for 2 weeks. The man who'd taken them, Raymond, their mother's boyfriend who'd become their guardian after she died, had descended into paranoia and madness. He'd told them he was protecting them, keeping them safe from a dangerous world. But Levi knew the truth. They were prisoners. When Raymond left for groceries that evening, Levi had seen his chance. He'd watched YouTube videos before being taken, videos about lockpicking and escape techniques, the kind of thing a curious kid watches without ever thinking he'd need to use them. He'd found a paper clip in the basement corner and worked on that lock for an hour while Emma watched, her small face pale with fear and hope. When the lock finally clicked open, Levi had written that note. He'd folded it carefully and put it in his pocket, a lifeline in case he didn't make it, in case someone found him collapsed on the side of the road. Then he'd tried to lift Emma to the window, but she was too weak, too scared, and time was running out. "I told her I'd bring help," Levi whispered, fresh tears streaming down his face. "I told her to be brave. But what if he came back? What if I'm too late?" Karen's professionalism kicked in like a tidal wave. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. She read the address, read the note word for word, emphasized the urgency. Every second mattered. Every heartbeat counted. This was one of those real-life stories where minutes meant the difference between salvation and tragedy. The police arrived at the clinic within minutes, but they seemed like hours. Levi told his story again, halting, broken, but complete. He described the basement, the single dirty mattress they shared, the canned food Raymond left them, the bucket in the corner, the darkness that felt like it would swallow them whole. He described Emma, her long brown hair, her pink pajamas with stars, the stuffed rabbit she clutched even in sleep. He described how she'd gotten sicker each day, how her cries had grown weaker. And he described the moment he'd climbed out that window, the guilt that had crushed his chest with every step he ran through the rain. Karen held his hand as the police radio crackled to life. Units were en route to 412 Maple Street. Entry team ready. Every muscle in Karen's body was tense, every nerve on fire. She found herself praying, something she hadn't done in years, praying to anyone who might listen that this little girl was still alive, that Levi's bravery hadn't been in vain, that these heartwarming stories she'd heard throughout her career could have one more chapter written in hope rather than heartbreak. The radio exploded with activity. Suspect apprehended in driveway. Female juvenile located in basement. She's responsive. Repeat, she's responsive. Ambulance en route. Karen watched as every ounce of tension drained from Levi's body, only to be replaced by something else. Racking sobs that shook his entire frame. "She's okay?" he managed. "Emma's okay?" The officer knelt down and looked Levi in the eyes. "Because of you, son. Because you were brave enough to run, smart enough to write that note, and strong enough to ask for help. You saved your sister's life." But Karen saw something else in Levi's eyes. Guilt. The guilt of leaving her behind, even for a moment. The guilt of being the one who escaped while she stayed in the dark. These are the invisible scars that would take time to heal, the wounds that no bandage could cover. Karen made a decision in that moment, one that would change the trajectory of her own life. She wasn't letting these children disappear into the system, not if she could help it. The reunion was something Karen would remember for the rest of her life. Emma's small voice, hoarse but filled with absolute certainty. "Levi came back. I knew he would." She reached for her brother with thin arms, and Levi collapsed into her embrace, finally allowing himself to break completely. Karen stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her own face as these two children who'd survived hell held on to each other like lifelines. This was more than one of those hopeful journeys people talk about. This was proof that love, pure, sibling love, could survive anything. The investigation revealed Raymond's complete mental breakdown after taking custody of the children following their mother's death. He'd lost his job, isolated himself, and constructed a delusional reality where keeping them locked away was protection rather than imprisonment. He'd face charges that would put him away for decades, but Karen's focus wasn't on him. It was on Levi and Emma, who had no other family, no safety net, no home to return to. The legal process was complicated, but Karen was relentless. She'd spent her career helping children from a professional distance, but this time was different. This time, she couldn't walk away. 6 months of paperwork, home inspections, court appearances, and psychological evaluations later, Karen officially became Levi and Emma's foster parent, with adoption proceedings underway. The note, that crumpled piece of paper that had started everything, now hung framed in her office, a reminder that hope can be written on the smallest scrap of paper, carried in the smallest hand. Levi thrived in school, his natural intelligence and resourcefulness channeled into academics and chess club. Emma, once quiet and withdrawn, blossomed into a chatty, energetic kindergartner who never wanted to be far from her brother. Karen watched them play in the backyard of their new home, watched them learn to be children again, watched them heal. But sometimes, late at night, Levi would still appear in her doorway, unable to sleep. And Karen would sit with him, and they'd talk about bravery and guilt and the impossible choices we sometimes have to make. "Do you think I did the right thing?" Levi asked one of those nights. "Leaving her to get help?" Karen took his hand. "I think you did the only thing. The brave thing. You didn't abandon your sister, Levi. You saved her. That note in your hand wasn't just directions to a location. It was a promise that you'd come back, that you'd bring help, that your love for her was stronger than fear. And you kept that promise." The detective who'd worked their case told Karen later that without that note, they might not have found Emma in time. Levi's resourcefulness, his ability to write clearly under unimaginable pressure, his decision to keep that note clutched in his hand through his entire desperate run, had been the difference between life and death. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. Sometimes hope fits in the palm of a child's hand, and sometimes real-life stories are more powerful than anything fiction could create. That October night, Karen had heard a whisper in the darkness. "I'm alone." But Levi had never truly been alone. He'd carried his love for Emma every step of his journey. He'd carried hope in a crumpled note, and that note ensured he'd never have to be alone again. Because sometimes asking for help isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing we can do. Sometimes children show us what real courage looks like, and sometimes hope is just a whisper away, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of hopeful journeys and the resilience of the human spirit, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more real-life stories of courage, survival, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us all. Because every voice matters, every story deserves to be heard, and sometimes the smallest hands hold the biggest miracles. Together we can keep these heartwarming stories alive and remind the world that hope never dies. It just waits for someone brave enough to carry it forward.